What's going on, Reef Builders? I'm Jake Adams, and I have a very special interview today. The very busy man, Mr. Justin Lawyer. Thanks for sitting down with us. What is the overall feeling in the change of direction or the improvements from the G4 to G5? But not the little details that we're going to get into.
The biggest changes are going to be within the spread and the uniformity of the light over an aquarium. It's more than double the emitters or diodes, and with the goal of just using fewer lights to cover a larger area.
For longest time, initially, the name of the game was to try to make brighter and brighter lights and try to hit these sometimes artificial par numbers, on a focused little point. But so what I find super interesting is that the peak par values of the Radions has actually decreased from probably about the Gen 3 to the Gen 5?
Yeah, starting with the Gen 3 to the Gen 4, the peaks would have decreased. Going to the HEI optic and the HEI2 optic now, the goal has been to use the light in a more integrated fashion. So rather than compete in this idea of an arms race of we have the brightest light, we are changing our direction to try to create the most light. And you won't have that hot spot. You don't have the volcano peak in your par skin, but you get as flat of a output field as we can manage using the current available technology.
So you mentioned the HEI lenses. This is the hemispherical edge illumination light, so it's like a little bubble. And you mentioned HEI2, and I haven't heard that term, so tell us about the new lens cluster.
So this is before an XR30. If you look at it geometrically, it's nearly identical. It's a smaller package for the upcoming LEDs that are smaller size. It also has a mixing effect. It's a surface finish that's a very special surface finish that we apply to the lens to help soften the edges.
I noticed that, right? So these are super well polished and clear, and these have just like a micro abrasion or something just to help diffuse a little bit.
Yeah, it's put in using a process where it's actually eroded with a spark on the surface of the mold for the part.
So the one thing that most people don't know is how much attention to detail you place beyond what anybody would ever notice.
That's the hope.
All right, so we have new lenses and we have new LEDs. Now this is a lot of LEDs, and they're so small, but it's a ton of power. So tell us what has changed from just the LEDs and then the clusters from the last gen to this one.
Well, obviously the quantity. So we've gone from 28, I think, per cluster on the previous gen. You have to fact check me on that because I forgot. To this is 100 emitters on the XR30. This is a pre-production part. It doesn't have the moonlight, so it's actually there'd be 102. But the biggest change to the LEDs is they're using a 1mm squared die package, which is the semiconductor die inside of the LED. But the actual package, the full package of the LED is much smaller. So we can compress a lot more into the same amount of space. Obviously, there's no more room for a fan on the bottom of the light on an XR30. So we had to move that to another location.
Just seeing that, but even not seeing it light up is very, very exciting. So how much total power is the light going to use? Is this the same as before?
It's the same as before.
It's the same power supply.
Yep. It's a few watts more. It's about 5 watts more.
Okay.
But it's around 180.
Tell us about the fan, because you made the fan.
We did.
You designed the fan.
We did.
That's crazy.
Well, we
Why did you design your own fan?
Because we couldn't get what we wanted. I mean, so traditionally, if you went out and bought a fan, it would look much like that.
Is it safe to call this a computer fan?
Yeah, so that's an open frame DC fan that is used for cooling. It's just like any other fan. It's just like the previous fan that was in the Radion, but it doesn't have the box around it like you would see at a computer fan.
So you built your own fan because you couldn't find what you wanted. What did you want? What did you want from a fan that you had to go make your own?
I wanted it to be quieter.
Quieter?
Yeah.
And move more air.
Well, the airflow that we got out of the fan that we've used in every Radion since has been more than adequate. I mean, when we went to the high density fans, starting with the G4, the average speed of our fans are running at about 30% of sort of our minimum to our maximum, which is fine. They were nice and quiet, and it still gives you enough overhead that if they're in a warm environment, such as like a coral farm, they can still produce, and noise is not a consideration at that point. They can produce all the airflow they need to keep.
So this is your new fan?
This is our new fan.
And so I see it's kind of closed. Does that help to increase the pressure to push air through?
So the closed edge is in an effort to keep it quieter.
Okay.
So you don't have that leading edge that's creating the wave of noise that comes up as the air washes across it.
Yeah, it's just one of those things. I've been obviously following along with Ecotech Marine saga for a long time, and people just don't understand or have any idea of like the things you have to build the things you want to build.
Right.
And sometimes that's machinery, sometimes that's tooling that people never will see. Right. But there's one of those really cool little features that, I don't know, it just really adds to the Ecotech Marine touch. It's like people experience it, but they don't know why.
Right.
Yeah.
So we tuned this in using two metrics. One was to have adequate airflow to cool the light at a reduced noise level, which we were able to hit. And then we built in enough performance that we sort of said, okay, well, we'll use the G4 as our maximum noise level metric. And so then we tuned this so that it could, or we built the motor so that it could spin as fast as it needs to. And at that noise level, I mean, you're getting a ridiculous amount of airflow. I can't imagine that you'll ever see a consumer running this light with that thing running at full speed.
So are there any side effects of you going from, the underneath mounted fan to the top mounted fan that you've seen so far, or does the heat sink work more or less the same?
One of the nice things about the G4 was that it was not easily obstructed, so it could tolerate quite a bit of dust and debris. Go into a top-mounted fan, you have to...
A lot more dust will
you have a
fall
lot
on
more
it.
dust, it'll settle, salt spray will settle on top of it, so we had to take some extra precautions. You're also opening the top of the fixture up to, wet hands, people touching it and getting water dripping on the light. So we've had to take extra steps to ensure that we keep water ingress to a minimum.
This is something you did with the aqua illumination lights, and this is something you do with every product,
Yeah,
right? Every
yeah.
generation, you're like, all right, let's refine some of this and some of that.
But the cool thing about the G5 is that it is very water resistant compared to, say, a G4 Pro. So something that we try to educate our consumers so that they can best use the product, but things happen.
So now that you have the fan on top, how does the light mount to your existing Radion mounting system?
There's an updated RMS bracket that actually works for the G4 too, and we think it looks pretty nice. So we're going to move everything over to those brackets.
So most of it is backwards compatible, but there's just one little bracket that's necessary for the G5.
Yeah, it does need. It still mounts to the RMS. It can still mount either transverse or perpendicular to the rail. It doesn't rotate any further, but we found that most consumers are not putting them at a 45-degree angle, for example.
It's more like a trade show thing.
It is, right? It's just for, it's when people want to make it look interesting.
And so you've always made at least two Radion sizes, and usually two models. So is there going to be a Radion XR15 Pro Gen 5 also?
Of course.
And so it'll be like a square?
Yep, it'll look almost...
The housing will be the same.
Right, so
this one already has a top-mounted fan.
Yep, exactly.
So is this a lot easier for you to upgrade?
Believe it or not, we still had to change a lot of things in order to accommodate that. It wasn't as simple as just replacing the light engine with a new light engine. It was a whole... We sought out not to change anything at all, and we ended up changing every single part. And
that's because you're perfectionists.
Perhaps.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, this blue heat sink is not just for show. tell us what the blue heatsink is for. And besides, I mean, if anybody who's a Reef Builders fan, you know I'm all about those blue trim. So just holding this makes me very happy. Tell us about the blue heatsink.
It's purely aesthetic. The blue heat. So there's a blue version of the light coming out.
And what's it going to be called?
The XR30 blue.
The XL30 blue.
Yeah. So there's a blue version of the light coming out.
What does that mean? It's not blue. The fixture's not blue.
It's tuned to run the spectrum that a lot of our consumers have given us feedback and saying they really like, which is the AB Plus from Core Lab. And it has some additional colors that we haven't used before. So it's got a mint LED, which is a softened version of the warm white, and it's got a cyan LED to kind of broaden the blue peak. But generally speaking, it is, if you were to take a Radion and turn it in, program it into AB Plus, that is what this spectrum is going to be at peak output.
Right.
So you still can tune it, you can still change it, you can create almost any color under the sun, but it will, at its peak power output, it's going to output in that spectrum.
Very nice. So yeah, I mean, I think that's just a really great move on your part, just making a light that's, in hardware sense, it's about that sweet spot of the spectrum that most reefers use it for. You need a completely different light for the freshwater market. When the light first came out, everybody was trying to do it all, right? We want to tune from 50,000 Kelvin all the way up to warm daylight. But over time, it's like, all right, well, the reef market
kind of settled in.
Things are kind of settled in. And so, what are some I guess under the hood changes that people might not expect in the day-to-day operation? I see you pulled out a little chip, a little piece of silicon right there.
All right. So this is a tri-band radio, is what we'd call it, and it's basically, it can communicate on 3 protocols simultaneously, so Bluetooth, Wi-Fi, and then a proprietary 802.15. By comparison, our 2 historical modules, I don't think a lot of people know still to this day, but so the first radio that we developed after the original wireless wave driver, we built it as a module and put it in every product that we could.
Yeah, I remember this. I've actually swapped them all around from time to time.
A few years ago, we switched that module for this one, but on the surface, we didn't change any of the programming. But that module there can communicate on Bluetooth.
And Wi-Fi?
No, just Bluetooth.
Just Bluetooth, okay.
So, but it can communicate Bluetooth and 802.15, so it's a dual band radio.
Okay.
So the lights talk to themselves via one protocol, and then you can communicate with the light or the pump or whatever using Bluetooth direct to the device. That's something that's going to come online with the launch of the G5, where you will no longer need a ReefLink to configure. And we've talked about it, you've seen it, lots of users have actually beta tested it, which is...
It's like the worst kept secret. You guys are literally like...
No, we'll tell everybody else.
Without a formal announcement. You come to the shows, you talk to them, like, oh yeah, check this out. But there's not any press releases about it.
Right, because we're trying to feel it out and understand how people are going to use it. We want to make it really intuitive and very simple to use. And I think there's the case where a consumer, let's say it's birthday, Christmas, what have you, they get 2 XR30s and they get a ReefLink and a Vortec. And while the interface is very powerful to be able to configure those and do a lot of different things with them, it does take some time. And if you're in a market, say in Australia or a market in the UK, and you don't have blazing fast access to internet, or even in the United States, it can be troublesome.
Yeah.
It can take, and frustrating. And so one of the key things we wanted to do for our consumers was to relieve them of that burden. And I think conservatively, I could say that you could take that same system, 2 Radions and a Vortec, using Mobius, using the Bluetooth integration, or using the new Bluetooth integration, and you can be up and running in under 5 minutes. And that is, I don't think anybody else is doing that currently. The G5 adds to that, it will have Wi-Fi. So where these wouldn't give you remote access to, say, EcoSmart Live or Mobius when you're outside your house, the G5 will do that, and it'll enable you to communicate with all of your other products that you have in your home.
Really want to thank you for your time. Your impact on the global reef aquarium hobby was immeasurable. It really is. And so it's just a pleasure to be here. Yeah, it's really cool to kind of get into the nitty gritty of what makes the new Radion Gen 5 so interesting that this really kind of reflects all the products in the line.
You know what's interesting, you know what's funny to me is where I am now, like sitting here doing this, all started from the Modern Reef Aquarium by Martin Bell.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to set up a 55-gallon reef tank. Before my dad would let me set up that aquarium, he made me read this book, and as a 12-year-old, that's a pretty decent-sized tome.
And it's not easy reading.
No, but he showed how to build all your own equipment, and that's exactly where this is how I ended up here.
And you're still at it
in some weird way. So
yeah,
it's cool.
Well, thanks a lot for your time.
Cheers.
I know you're not keen to do the interviews, but we're gonna make this work for the real fans, the real diehard fans. So if you see this guy at a conference.
Oh, I love talking to people. I just hate
give him a thank you and get him a beer. All right, Justin.
All right, cheers.